If you've ever lived in the country, you know how quiet can turn heavy, how it starts as peace, then slowly becomes the sound of things you wish you couldn't hear. I grew up in a house like that. White siding, long gravel driveway, the smell of diesel and rain-soaked dirt. From the outside, we looked like every other family in our small Iowa town, but what people saw and what we lived were two very different things. My mother married him when I was 10. His name was Frank, a man of few words, quick temper, and a smile that fooled everyone but me. At first, he tried to act kind, brought home flowers for Mom, fixed the fence, took me for ice cream after school. But kindness has a strange way of showing its expiration date, and his didn't last long. The first time I saw his real face, it was over something small, a plate I'd dropped in the sink. The sound of it shattering felt louder than thunder. He grabbed my wrist so hard I thought it might snap. "You break things," he hissed, "because you don't care." I did care. I cared too much, but in our house, caring didn't count for much. My mother said he was just old-fashioned, that he'd had a hard life. So I learned to keep quiet, to stay small, to measure my breathing by the sound of his boots on the floorboards. If he walked slow, it was safe. If he walked fast, it was best to disappear. Years passed that way. I finished high school, got a job at the feed store, and pretended everything was normal. In towns like ours, pretending was easier than explaining. People always asked why I never dated, why I never went to dances. I just smiled and said, "I like the quiet." But the truth was, I didn't know how to exist in a world where voices didn't sound like warnings. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been hurt by someone who convinced everyone else they were the hero? The night everything changed, the summer heat was unbearable. You could smell the cornfields sweating. I came home late from work. The store had stayed open longer for harvest season. The porch light was off, and the house was dark. Inside, I found my mother sitting at the kitchen table, hands shaking, face pale. "He's gone," she whispered, "packed up and left." For the first time in years, the house was silent in a way that felt real. But I didn't cry. Not for him. Not for us, not even for all the years I'd lost trying to keep peace with a man who didn't know what love was. I just stood there, feeling the space he left behind, and realized it wasn't empty. It was finally mine. That night, I opened every window in the house and let the Iowa wind blow through every room. It smelled like rain and freedom. And for the first time since I was 10, I slept without fear of footsteps. The morning after he left, the house felt like it was breathing again. The air was cool, the windows open, the sound of crickets spilling through the curtains. Mama sat at the kitchen table, still wearing the same robe from the night before. Her hands shook as she stirred her coffee. She didn't look relieved. She looked lost. "He'll come back," she said softly. "He always comes back." But I knew this time was different. He'd taken his boots, and men like Frank never leave without their boots. For the next few days, the house was quiet but tense. Mama would wander from room to room, touching things he used to own. I tried to stay busy, cleaned the barn, did laundry, anything that made noise. Silence had always belonged to him. I wasn't ready to give it power again. By the third week, the letters started coming. Not from him. but from people in town. Church ladies with soft voices and sharp judgments. We're praying for your family. He's a good man. He just needs guidance. You shouldn't drive a man away like that. I didn't reply to any of them. I just folded each letter, stacked them neatly, and set them on the table beside Mama's coffee cup. One afternoon, while hanging laundry, I heard her crying through the open window. Not quiet tears, the kind that come from years of holding everything in. I went inside and found her clutching one of Frank's shirts, rocking in her chair. "I don't know who I am without someone to take care of," she whispered. And that's when I realized some people don't need cages. They build them themselves. Tell me in the comments, have you ever watched someone you loved choose their chains, even when the door was open? I stayed for another month, long enough to fix what I could. Repaired the back fence, sold off his old tools, paid the bills with my paycheck from the store. But one evening, as the sun set over the cornfields, I looked out the window and saw my reflection against the glass. Older than I should have been, tired but standing tall. And I heard my own voice say quietly, "It's time." I packed my things into the same duffel bag I'd used since high school. A few clothes, a photo of Mama before she met him, and my first paycheck stub, the proof that I could make it on my own. Mama didn't stop me. She just stood in the doorway, tears in her eyes. "You're just like me," she said softly. "You don't know when to quit." I smiled a little. "No, Mama, I just finally learned when to leave." That night, I drove down Highway 92 with the windows rolled down, the sound of the fields rustling in the wind like they were whispering goodbye. I didn't know where I was going, but for once in my life, the not knowing didn't scare me. The road was dark, but it was mine. I drove until the sun started to rise. The road stretched straight and endless, like God himself had drawn it with a steady hand. By morning, I found myself in Des Moines, a place that felt too big, too loud, but also like the first breath after years of holding it in. I rented a room above a bakery that smelt like sugar and safety. The landlord, a widow named Mrs. Callahan, asked no questions. She just handed me a key and said, "You look like someone who's needed a door for a while." And she was right. The first weeks were hard. I was 23, with no college degree and barely enough to buy groceries. I worked wherever I could, first at a diner, then at a hardware store. Every paycheck felt like proof I could stand on my own 2 feet. But some nights, when the streets went quiet, the memories came back like whispers under the door. The shouting, the sound of glass breaking, the look in my mother's eyes when she pretended everything was fine. I used to hate that look. Now, I just pitied it. A few months later, I started taking evening classes at the community college. Writing classes mostly. The teacher, Mr. Bennett, was kind but blunt. He'd say, "Write what you know." So I did. At first it came out messy, half memories, half tears. But the more I wrote, the more the pages stopped being about pain and started being about power. Tell me in the comments, have you ever looked back at your scars and realized they were the map that led you out? By winter, I was helping Mrs. Callahan at her bakery in the mornings before class. She said I had a steady hand for decorating cakes. I told her it came from learning how to stay quiet. She smiled. "Quiet hands build beautiful things, sweetheart." And that became my favorite kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't break, just keeps going. Then, one night, I got a phone call. Mama. Her voice was thin like the wind through dry grass. She said, "Frank's back. He came by asking for you." I froze. "Did he hurt you?" No, she said. He just wanted to know where you went. Said he'd changed. I didn't believe him. But I did believe something else. That if I didn't face that chapter once and for all, I'd never really leave it behind. A week later, I drove back home. The road looked the same, but I didn't. The house stood small and tired under the gray sky. Mama opened the door and hugged me like she hadn't exhaled in months. She whispered, "He's gone again." Said he was sorry, left this. She handed me a note. Short, scribbled, desperate. "I hurt you both. I see it now. I hope you find peace I couldn't give you." I read it once. Then I tore it in half. "Do you forgive him?" Mama asked. I thought about it. Really thought. And then I said, "I don't need to." Because forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't always for the person who broke you. Sometimes it's the gift you give yourself so you can finally stop living in their shadow. That night, I stayed in my old room. The walls were still pale yellow, the same cracks tracing along the ceiling like faint constellations. I stared at them and realized I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I wasn't waiting for footsteps. I was building my own. The next morning, the first snow of the year had fallen. Thin, soft flakes resting gently on the fence posts and bare fields. It was strange how the same place that had once felt like a prison now looked almost peaceful under a blanket of white. Mama made coffee, humming to herself. Her voice was shaky, but it was still there. And that, somehow, felt like a small miracle. We didn't talk about Frank again. We didn't need to. Some stories end not with words, but with silence that finally feels safe. I stayed another week, helped her patch the roof, clean the barn, throw out the last of his old clothes. Every chore felt like reclaiming something. By the end, the house smelled like lemon soap and fresh air instead of fear. On my last night there, we sat by the window watching the snow come down. Mama took my hand and said, "You're stronger than I ever was." I shook my head. "No, Mama, you just never had someone to show you you could be." She smiled, a real smile this time, and I knew we'd both made it out, even if it took us different roads to get there. Tell me in the comments, have you ever realized that surviving wasn't weakness, but proof that you were made to begin again? When I went back to Des Moines, life didn't magically get easier, but it got clearer. I finished my classes, started writing again, not about pain this time, but about people like us, the quiet ones who learned how to turn endurance into art. Mrs. Callahan helped me print my first short story. She cried when she read it, said it reminded her of her own daughter who never made it out. I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her, and for a long moment, we both let the silence do the talking. Years have passed since then. I run a small bakery now, the one she left me when she passed. Morning smell of coffee and cinnamon. And sometimes I catch the sunrise reflecting off the flour dust in the air. Soft, golden, alive. People come in and say, "You've got such a gentle way about you." And I just smile, because they'll never know the storms it took to earn that gentleness. Once in a while, Mama calls. She's growing old, her voice thinner but lighter somehow. She tells me the lilacs by the porch are blooming again, that the house finally feels like hers. And every spring, I drive back to plant one new bush beside the fence line. It's my way of saying, the past doesn't get the last word. We do. That's the thing about cruelty. It can break you for a while, but if you're patient, if you survive it, It becomes the soil where your strength grows. I used to wish I'd had a different childhood. Now I just wish I'd known sooner that I'd make it out alive. Because strength doesn't always look like fighting back. Sometimes it looks like walking away and building something beautiful out of what tried to destroy you. And that's what I did. Because here on True Life Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember them. Subscribe, stay with us, and help the silence end one true story at a time.